like to introduce our first speaker, and that is Tathagata Acharya. He's going to be talking about pore-scale modeling of sandstones using computational fluid dynamics and the associated research that they've done under this project. Tat?
Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you, Tony. I'm going to be sharing my screen right now. I hope all of you can hear me. Are you able to see my screen?
Yes.
Okay. Okay, so I guess I'll start speaking. And I need to, yeah. Okay, so good afternoon, everybody. Once again, my name is Tathagata Acharya. I'm an assistant professor in the Department of Physics and Engineering. This was the work that I did with my colleague, Dr. Liaosha Song, who's also an assistant professor in the Department of Geology. So the topic of our work, the title of our research is Evaluation of Flow Characteristics of Carbon Dioxide in a Sandstone core sample using computational fluid dynamics. So to begin with, I'm going to talk about the objective behind this work. I'm going to show you modeling of carbon dioxide flow through sandstones. I'm going to talk about solving the equations that I basically do as part of the CFD work. And these are Navier-Stokes equations, the flow equations. I'm going to show you the boundary and the initial conditions. I'll follow it up with the CFD results. I'll show you the carbon dioxide saturation curve through this core sample. And then I'll show you how much water has been displaced by carbon dioxide. And then I'll conclude. So what's the objective of our research? So the objective of this research is actually twofold. We are looking to we are looking into carbon dioxide sequestration. Now, carbon dioxide is the most significant greenhouse gas. As we all know, it contributes to global warming. So it needs to be safely stored. And carbon dioxide can actually be stored in sandstone reservoirs. The other thing that you could potentially do with carbon dioxide is associated with enhanced oil recovery. So there are reservoirs from where oil is otherwise not recoverable. So you could inject carbon dioxide, and carbon dioxide flooding could actually help you recover more oil from there. So, that's the objective of this work. And we're gonna simulate this using computational fluid dynamics. So this is my simulation geometry. So this is basically a sandstone core sample. And then the length of the sample is 79 millimeters. The diameter is about 38 millimeters. We chose a permeability of close to 1 Darcy to begin with, which is about 987 millidarcies. And then once we started meshing, now this is the mesh that we used for the simulations. So right now it's all mesh independent. So if you reduced the mesh size, you would get the same results. So basically we chose this mesh. We had about 1.24 million elements. It's a hexahedral mesh. And again, I showed you the permeability, which is about 987 millidarcy. So I'm basically going to be injecting carbon dioxide from this end, which is being shown by the flow direction. And I'll see how it looks like how carbon dioxide flows through this sample. So these are the equations that we are basically solving. These are Navier-Stokes equations. So I teach fluid mechanics here, and my students know what these equations are. So, this is the continuity equation, which is associated with mass conservation. And these are the momentum equations. Now, you could also solve the energy equation if you're interested in looking into how temperature changes. Now, for these simulations and the results that I'm going to be showing you today are associated with just the momentum and the continuity equations, which is much less computationally expensive to begin with. So these are the boundary conditions. This is the core sample, as you can see. If you take a look at the contour profile here, so it shows that 1 is red, which means that initially you have all water. So I'm trying to see how water can be displaced by carbon dioxide as I inject carbon dioxide through the sample. So initially I had all water except for the inlet where I'm injecting carbon dioxide. So it's blue here at the inlet because the volume fraction of water there is 0 and it's all 1 for carbon dioxide, okay? So the boundary conditions, I have 1 megapascal gauge pressure at the inlet and the outlet pressure is atmospheric. I already spoke about the permeability, which is close to 1 Darcy. And then initially, as you can see here, it's all water and I'm just injecting carbon dioxide from the inlet. Now here are the preliminary CFD results, computational fluid dynamics results for the mixture pressure profile. So as you can see, obviously the pressure would drop through the sample. So you have 1 megapascal gauge at the inlet and it drops to atmospheric pressure at the outlet. If you go to the next slide, we'll see how carbon dioxide starts flowing through the sample. So, we had carbon dioxide at the inlet and nowhere else. So it was all blue, which meant that I had all water here. So the volume fraction of carbon dioxide was 0. Now, once you start injecting carbon dioxide, it changes close to the inlet, as you can see. It's no longer blue, it's about fluorescent and green, so which means that you have some volume fraction of carbon dioxide that's entering the sample. And this is after 10 seconds from the start, and you can take a look at what's going on at 20 seconds, 40 seconds, and I guess I have everything through 80 seconds here. This is the carbon dioxide saturation curve, which shows how the volume fraction of carbon dioxide is changing with time. This is inside of the entire geometry. So it started with 0 initially. It's linearly increasing right now, but we only have time for simulations through 80 seconds, and I would be continuing to do more simulations to see how it looks like beyond 80 seconds. And we feel that this is going to level out at some point of time. So right now it's looking linear, but maybe after 200 seconds or so, we would see this being leveling out because eventually it has to approach 1, right? Because it would, it would drive out all the water that you have inside of the reservoir or inside of the sample. This is the water volume that's being displaced. Now, this is instantaneous. This is a function of time. So at time t equal to 0, no water was displaced. At time t equal to 1 second, the water that's been displaced is close to about 0.2 ml. Now, this is based on the geometry that I'm simulating. And this is gradually increasing, and it remains at 0.25 ml between, let's say, 35 seconds and 80 seconds. Now, this should again drop later on when you have less water left inside of the geometry, okay? If you take a look at the next slide, so these are the conclusions basically. So, I'm basically doing a flooding simulation. So you do either flooding or imbibing. So this is a flooding simulation where you flood the sample with carbon dioxide and you see how much, what's the, how does the flow look like through the sample? So we're looking at the flow characteristics of carbon dioxide and also how much water can be recovered. Now I could do the same simulation with oil and it would have shown me how much oil I would have recovered. So it showed that the carbon dioxide volume fraction increases to approximately 12% in about 80 seconds. And we also saw that we could recover about 20 milliliters of water, which was there in the sample in these 80 seconds. Now I have a movie here that I would like to show you. This, if you pay attention to the right side of this sample, this is where I'm injecting carbon dioxide, okay? This is all red initially, which means that I have water inside of this sample. And, if I start the simulation here, and if you pay attention towards the right side, you would see carbon dioxide being injected and water being displaced. So you would see water being displaced gradually. So the volume fraction of water is gradually reducing. It's actually very slow, but you can eventually see some green there, which means that the volume fraction of water has dropped from 100% to about 50%. And with time, I mean, this is only 80 seconds. I guess I would run the simulations through 1,000 seconds or maybe more, and then you would see that water is being completely displaced from there. Okay, and then if I go to the next slide, I have the future work that I would like to do along with my colleague, Liaosha. We will continue to do simulations through at least an hour, which is about 3,600 seconds. We would like to do additional simulations varying the permeability of the core sample. Right now we are at about 1 Darcy, but we're going to reduce that. And then we'll do some validations against some experimental work which already exists there. Cole and Rasuli is a paper that I was looking at. And then we would also do 3D characterization of sandstone with micro CT. And then we intend to do some core flooding experiments in my lab here. And eventually we intend to apply for funding to support our research. So I guess with that, I end my presentation here, and I'm ready for any questions that you may have. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Tat. Questions, if you'd like to ask a question, please raise your hand and we'll try to find you. If you prefer, you can also write them in the chat and we'll get to those as well. So Tat, I have a question.
Sure.
In your simulations, what's the size of the sample that you're looking at? Is this on a micro level or on a macro level? And is there any accounting for permeability as well as porosity?
So this is actually at the macro level. So we looked into a paper and I tried to do something similar with my simulations here. So they had done some experiments with a similar sample in the lab. So this is about 79 millimeters in length and the diameter is 38 mm. So that's the size of the sample. So it's a core sample. And then, we looked into the porosity and the permeability. Well, we looked into the permeability. It's close to 1 Darcy. And it's about 987 millidarcies. And it's the same as what I'm using here in the simulations.
Saeed had his hand up. It's down now. Saeed, I don't know if you still have a question.
Yeah, if that's okay. Tad, I'm not very knowledgeable on the subject of what you would do with CO2. So I understand that from your initial slides, you're going to inject them. The idea, not your work, but is to inject them back to the ground. Now, in the sample, in the simulation, you show that you want to push the water out. I wonder what's the idea? What's going to happen to the water? You want to push it further down, or you're going to push it up to the ground?
Well, this is just a simulation replicating an experiment in the lab. So this is not necessarily, pushing carbon dioxide through a formation down there. This is just a simulation replicating that experiment that these guys did in the lab. So what they had was, they just had a sample, which was the same size, and they had brine in place of water. So I did water. So they had brine, and then they were injecting carbon dioxide and basically looking at two different things together. So how carbon dioxide propagates through the sample, that's one thing which I'm also showing you in the simulations here. And also, if you had water in there, could you recover some water from the sample? That's exactly what I did here. But yeah, the same thing could be done for oil. The same thing could be done for oil. And the same thing could be done to see, if you can simulate EOR, enhanced oil recovery.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so John, you had a question in the chat, and then David Gove has his hand up. So the question that John was asking is, have you considered simulations with oil or saline solutions?
So I did, I didn't start with any simulations with oil at this point. I did some preliminary simulations with oil before. But at this time, my only goal was to see if I can replicate the experiments that these guys did in the lab. And apparently I'm able to get, similar results with my simulations. Now that I have kind of validated my simulations, I'm going to go ahead and use that for oil.
Okay, great. So David, you have a question.
Yes. You flashed up a list of very impressive partial differential equations, and then said and then you just said you solved them. My question is, when you say you worked on solving them, is that an approximate solution, or are you able to get an exact solution to that system with your boundary conditions?
No,
And also, I know you're going to answer, but I'm going to say, as soon as you answer, I have to hop off to another meeting. So thank you and goodbye. And I can't listen to all the other ones. But...
So, this is actually being solved numerically. So I was using a software, ANSYS Fluent, which is a commercial CFD software. So I just showed the equations which are being solved. The Navier-Stokes equations there. So these are being solved numerically using the finite volume method. So
okay, that's what I thought. Just wanted to make sure.
Sure.
Okay, well, in the interest of time, we need to move on to the next talk. Thank you very much, Tat. That was excellent.
Thank you, everyone.
Looking forward to the results in the future. And again, if folks still have questions, please write them in the chat, and either Liaosha, Jason, or Tat will attempt to answer them.